So our next speakers are Brian and Colin from Silverchair.
Thanks, Govinder. Hi, I'm Brian McDonald, and this is Colin Brady. We're UX designers at Silverchair. We work with scholarly publishers to showcase their content on clean, easy-to-use, responsive websites, which we continually improve through iteration. Bonnie and Pan gave some great examples of specific UX methods. We're going to take a step back and give you a holistic view of our design process, some common problems we find, as well as some solutions. But first, why are we talking about UX today? Why is it so important? A study conducted by Walker Information, a customer intelligence firm, reports that by 2020, user experience will overtake price and product as the key brand differentiator. 2020 is fast approaching, and in 2016, we can already see how companies like Apple and Uber have used UX to lead their industries for the past 5 to 10 years. Apple has created an ecosystem in which people will willingly pay higher prices to be associated with the elegant simplicity of their products. And Uber has taken the somewhat creepy idea of getting a ride from a stranger and leveraged user experience to make it feel like a smart, efficient, cost-effective way to travel. Rather than accepting the limitations of computers that start up slowly or the need to hail a taxi down on a busy street, these companies put their users ahead of their industry's status quo. How do they do it? Empathy. They had empathy for them. They put their users' needs and wants above accepted norms and restrictions. At Silverchair, one of our core values is to solve problems with creativity and empathy. This rings particularly true to the UX design team. Creativity is essential to any successful design solution, but today we want to start by discussing the lesser acknowledged skill of empathy in UX design and why it's so important. Empathy is not about reading people's minds. It's about imagining how they feel when they experience your website or product. This is why we research, use personas, and frame ourselves in our users' mindsets, which helps us continually iterate and refine our designs. And we test. Testing helps us guide our empathy by giving us a more objective view in what features our users struggle with the most. The Nielsen-Norman Group reports that 85% of UX problems can be solved by testing with just 5 users. At Silverchair, we use a site called usertesting.com to test our designs at all stages. It lets us observe real users interacting with our mock-ups, prototypes, and live sites. Colin's going to show you a video in which a user struggles to find a particular drug on a 2-column layout.
All right, so as Brian mentioned, so we record our users' screens and their audio as we do these testing methods. And this person is looking for a drug on one of our pages.
Please find Ativan, A-T-I-V-A-N. A-T-A-F-A-L. There's got to be an easier way to do this.
There's got to be an easier way to do this. So it doesn't get much more obvious than that when you have some UX issues on hand. And design alone isn't going to solve interaction problems, and we can do our best guesses as to how things should be, but testing and iteration is the most important piece here. So that user was trying to scan a 2-column list that was alphabetical, that was very, very long, and it created a UX issue. And through one testing session, we figured that out. So I'm going to show you a slightly different designed version of a similar screen in a later slide that has a much better outcome. So, what are some things that they struggle with consistently? Testing helps us find major issues like poor page performance. If users are getting to pages and they're taking a while to load and they're not getting the content that they expect, they're going to have a poor outcome. It's going to color their experience through the rest of your site, and they may leave altogether. Lacking hierarchy. So this can range from trying to shove everything above the fold, which, by the way, doesn't exist on the web, to mislabeling things like menus and buttons. It can leave users feeling overwhelmed, not being able to ingest all the content that they're looking at, and they could leave as well. Forced experiences. So how many times have you gone to a website, gone to the shopping cart page and tried to check out, and found that you have to go through a lengthy sign-up process instead of just checking out as a guest? Or maybe you've gone to a site and tried to use your scroll wheel and the site just kind of took over for you, or it felt a little weird. That's called scroll jacking. Or maybe you've been reading an article and an interstitial ad pops up over the page for you, It's just not related to yourself or anything that you're reading. All these forced experiences create barriers for the users, and they are welcome to just leave your site if they don't like it. So we're talking about a lot of pain points with empathy, but who is we? Who's responsible for this? Designers. Garinder sort of talked to this a little bit earlier. We're the obvious piece. We handle user testing, wireframing, iteration on these designs and products. But we really need to think as a team about design. We're not the only people who need to be worrying about empathy in the user. Technologists. So too much emphasis on technology can sort of cloud your user experience thought process. We need to rethink our tech problems and look for new solutions, possibly with new technologies, so that we don't put our technology before the user's experience. Stakeholders and clients. So the big piece of this one is to balance your business goals with your understanding for your customers' needs. Creating barriers in the sake of business goals is going to cripple UX. So using empathy can help us understand the problems that people run into. A few common pain points that we think are pretty large that we've seen are poor search. So overly literal search engines can really cripple any search attempts that a user might make. These range from it not being able to understand typos, plurals, different spellings of words, or putting priority of results based on query count instead of what pages are actually relevant to the user. Content-heavy designs. We all know about this. We work in a very content-heavy industry. Giving pages ample amount of white space and removing forced elements or unneeded elements is going to allow users to be able to digest the content that they need. Incomplete journeys. So some of our last talks talked through sort of agile and wireframing approaches that can quickly iterate on designs. When you work through designs that quickly, it can leave UX gaps that you might not see. Having a verbal story about where the user's going and testing through with iteration, like Envision that we had just talked about with short prototypes, will help solve those gap problems.
So as we saw in the video Colin showed, the user encountered a number of problems with that page, a ton of content. She can't scan 2 columns at once. She has no tools to help her navigate. So what are some solutions? Well, every design has its own unique content and features. We think there are some fundamental principles that underlie every successful user experience. The following are some that we use in our day-to-day work at Silverchair. If you address these, you'll have a strong foundational experience design to build on. The sites we work on have a lot of content, as Colin just noted. It needs to be organized into clearly labeled sections that are easy to navigate. This is the job of information architecture. There's a great article on alistapart.com by Abby Covert, in which she refers to information architecture as the pain with no name. She says, disagreements about language and structure often go unresolved due to a lack of clear ownership. You can see this on a lot of websites, a lack of organized hierarchies, confusing content labels, and overabundance of options to choose from. But information architecture is a crucial part of UX design. Before their most recent redesign, the New York Times had a long list of links in the left nav of the homepage. It seemed to reflect every possible section of a print newspaper, including classifieds, real estate, and even the crossword puzzle, alongside the global and national news, as well as the arts and dining sections. I was always baffled by this because the rest of the site was well designed, was often at the forefront of web trends in multimedia, layout, and data visualization. But not only did their left nav contain too many choices leading to decision paralysis, it lacked hierarchical relationships between sections and was crammed into the left side of the site without any white space to ease the user's attempts to scan it. Why wasn't it organized better so movies and music didn't sit alongside the obituaries section? Thankfully, when they redesigned the site, they overhauled their information architecture. When users click on the sections menu, they get a much better curated list of options to choose from with a clear sense of hierarchy and better typography and spacing for scanning. Now users can find all of the specific arts sections under the arts label, and now the classifieds are tucked into a submenu with related content. It's rare to see a website go from such poor information architecture to such an improved restructuring, but I'm going to guess their current navigation is a product of much research, testing, and iteration. The next fundamental that can quickly improve the overall UX of your site is consistency. The best way to create consistency is to create design systems. This can take the form of a simple PDF style guide, or a more robust pattern library complete with front-end HTML and CSS. There's some great examples of these on the web. A few of our favorites include the US Web Design Standards site, this is the Yelp Style Guide, and Google's Material Design Guidelines. These are great tools for creating a common visual language, not only between designers and developers, but for everyone involved in a project, including project managers, stakeholders, and even upper management. They help explain a site's existing experience strategy and provide a roadmap for making updates to it going forward. Style guides let you organize your different type treatments in clear, easy-to-reference catalogs, so nobody has to guess at which font families, sizes, and weights you're using. Our front-end developers especially appreciate this. It also helps you stay efficient with your use of different styles, which is good for your users. A site shouldn't need more than 10 different type treatments. Repeating patterns helps users connect similar kinds of content and know where to direct their attention when scanning a page. If there's one thing we know for sure, it's that users don't read websites, they scan them. It can also include site elements like buttons, as in this example from Yelp, images, forms. Doing this makes your strategy transparent and makes good design sensibility apparent to everyone, which is great for settling debates. If you introduce these into your process, you'll have a lot less arguments to settle about what color to make your call to action button. Writing, Google even has a section on writing in their material design guideline to help strike the appropriate terminology and tone. This is really smart. The more aspects of the user experience you catalog in your design system, the clearer everybody involved in a project is on the standards and intent of the design. This helps you focus your time and research on testing and designing rather than having a meeting about whether to call a page help or FAQ. Colin's going to tell you about a few other fundamental principles of strong UX.
All right, let's talk about affordance. So affordance is the properties of a thing that determine how it can be used. It's the possibility of action. And we're going to go back to Don Norman again. I'm glad we opened with that. So he writes a lot about affordance in design. How many times have you pushed or pulled on a door only to be blocked and find complete resistance? I actually did it going out of the hotel room this morning and laughed. So this door design had such poor performance that they had to label it. Things should not work like that. We need to think about the affordances that we give our users so they know the actions that they can take. Even an apparently simple site design like this Tumblr page has 11 actions on it that a user can take. They did a good job pushing different elements to the side and having a sense of hierarchy so that you're not seeing every single action at once. But some of the outer elements you can see, there's sign up terms. You can go to the user's page that took this photo, and there's search in the upper corner. And affordances are just as important at the macro levels as they are at the micro levels. So just looking at buttons and form elements here, you can see on the left side we have a flat button, and the one below it, button 2, has a little bit of shading below it. It adds just that much more affordance to the user knowing that that button's going to be pressed. And if a page had loaded, as you can see on the right side, and you're quickly scanning it, do you know immediately which of those 3 fields is a button? You can probably tell right now just by glancing at it, but that is a very low level of affordance there on the right side. So feature sets. Features are often looked at as a value of a site's worth. Adding as many features as possible can be really harmful to user experience. More choices doesn't equal better satisfaction. The right choices for the users equals a better user experience altogether. Research has shown that with too many feature sets and too many choices for users, we find a loss of interaction, we find abandoned shopping carts, and users will leave sites altogether. So take a look at this WYSIWYG box. You can see that they just dumped every single action possible in the top toolbar. Anyone that's new to this would possibly be a little confused. I'm sure it would take a few sessions to understand where the most important ones are, why they didn't just decide to put the most used objects at the top, maybe hide some others under contextual menus, I don't know. Or here's another eyesore of an interface. A patient actually lost their life because of oversight due to the complication of this interface. Here's an overly complicated password entry field. This site actually has its own landing page just to teach you how to create passwords and enter them. This is by the US Census Bureau. Thanks, guys. And here's another one. So this is for donor information. They're literally pushing money away just by creating such a long form field here for people to fill out. So now that we've gone through empathy in general, and we have an understanding for user problems, a few solutions for them, I'm going to show you a slightly differently designed interface and a test that we ran for it that's similar to the first video. So this user is looking for viral meningitis.
Okay, let's find meningitis. Again, it's very quick too. But instead of going all the way down, let's go and let's click M. Okay, so that's a nice little thing to have too, something that would make the quote-unquote trip to meningitis a lot shorter. Also, just out of curiosity, here we go. And now it just says that, so we're under meningitis here. So we'll click on this, meningitis. Again, that wasn't difficult at all to find, and I really do appreciate having different options of finding it. So you can either use the letter tabs up here, or for quicker search, you can just type it in, which is, again, is always great to have options.
All right, much better, right? We solved our problem there. So having empathy for the user and for the teams that you're working with is going to create a higher level of trust with your coworkers, with your users. It's going to save you time, it's going to save you money, and you're going to be happier about the products that you put out there. So we believe strongly in these approaches we covered at Silverchair. We try and wrap them into our daily lives every day. And we're happy with the products that we put out because of it. And at this point, I'll open the floor up to any questions that you all have.
Thank you. So I thought like it'll be good to just have a more of a open Q&A session where we can talk openly maybe about, I was wondering maybe how many people in the room are actually working through redoing the user experience of any of their products right now. Is anybody in the room who's doing it? Okay. So maybe I thought it'll be good to have all the experts here. We can talk, from that perspective, what is your product, and maybe we can actually take a real life example of the process we should go through. You've seen a lot of things, do's and don'ts. You've seen the case study, but I'm sure, but I'll let these experts talk about what you need for a specific product is not the same thing for every product. So how do you go through the process may be different. Do you guys think that would be a good approach? So maybe we can, if you can just explain what is your product and what you're looking at, and then we can have the experts here talk through that. Yes, sorry.
So I can't really talk to specifics because I'm a freelance consultant and I can't disclose what product or website it is. But what I found, I've done this a couple of times now, leading these types of projects, and usually it's relatively easy to get an understanding, to get the data, to conduct the interviews, whatever techniques we saw earlier, and to arrive at a recommendation. This is what we should do. Let's take the information architecture example you just showed. And then there's a political aspect. Some department head just needs to have like this list in this way and with these sub-options represented. Although like the data goes against it, although like experience goes against it, and that is always a problem. Like actually convincing people, breaking through these political deadlocks to actually overcome this. And that would be interesting for me to learn if you have experienced, or I'm sure you have experienced similar situations, and what you have done to work around this, to convince people to see the light. I'm turning the question back to you.
I mean, I would say that's where user testing becomes really powerful if you can show evidence of, stronger design or, just to show that you're sort of putting forth your own preferences, that, your decisions are based on research and evidence, and you can actually share, those kind of testing videos we showed with your clients and stakeholders.
And you can, do A and B testing too. So if they're really set on one way and your data's against it, I mean, sometimes this is more a change management issue than really it is a user testing issue per se. But if you had to take it one step further, that's what I would do probably is, okay, if this is how you want to see it, I mean, make them both very nice so that there's no issues, no inherent bias in that, that's the right word. And then videotape them and show people's reactions to each one. And maybe they have a point on something, one thing that you didn't know about that they might have understood and how certain personas of users work. So it's possible.
That's what we did with ours, because our management team we're editors, we know what they want. We know, this is the design. I'm like, okay, that's great. There are 3 designs here, kind of conservative, moderate to completely, wow, new. And we set it out there, and there was no denying it. It was 100% for the other 2 combined, and nothing for the one that they wanted. So they took a pause, and they were like, okay, you might have a point. Trying to prove that without that, it would never have happened. We would have gone with option A.
I guess I can say for some of the outliers, for the problems where there's just too much ego and it's not really a question, they don't care if they have this data. This doesn't work for everyone, but a night out at the bar to gain some trust with someone, it goes a long way. I think it's really understated, but the relationship that you have with these clients is very important into getting your point across, and they just might not trust you until that's bridged.
Yes.
So I'm curious, there's always UI problems. It doesn't matter how well developed the site is. What are your biggest UI challenges right now? And I'm curious from all 3 of you.
When you say UI, do you mean specifically the front end representation of the experience?
Front end, well, actually it may not be. It may be the political aspect
Yeah.
too, because I know that's always an issue. And it also can be the developers knowing this technology is great, but it really doesn't serve the end user. What is your biggest challenge that you're trying to work through right now in the product? I guess it's part of the application overall, and what impact that has on the user experience.
Yeah, go for it.
So browser support, I think, was a big one for a while. That's getting a lot better as of very recently. I think most recently, we, at least personally, have been looking at problems with adding a lot of heavy feature sets that make a lot of calls to the database or are connecting with so many APIs, and you're looking at performance issues at that point. So that's, just like we had talked about trying to drop features when there's too many. It's big when you take clients or you do redesigns. It's easy to say that you want all the same features that you had on pages, but you need to look closely at those and see what the interaction value is with them.
For our case, it was more continuity across all of our products. So the big challenge is, this looks great in print. How do we continue that user experience online where you're recognizably C&EM across the board, maintaining the brand appearance, and bringing them all together, given the inherent differences between them as forums to look at. So that was our big challenge, and we're still working through that and trying to maintain individuality, but also trying to maintain consistency, which is going back to what these guys were saying about the style guide. Forcing all the design teams to adhere to one style guide is like a huge political battle, because I don't want to do that. I'll do that afterwards. That's just paperwork. No, it's not. Because then that translates across into your marketing material, into your newsletters, into your Facebook, everything. So that's our big UI challenge.
And what I'll add probably adds on to what Colin was saying. It's priority of features. So also there's numerous departments that often come together into a website, so they all want their stuff. I know you said there's nothing above the fold or below the fold on a website. It's true, but you do have to scroll down, and there's, what you see right when you first enter versus what's a little bit secondary. And so prioritization, so you don't have too much on that top part of the screen. And there often is sort of disagreement amongst, departments of who wants their stuff on top. So, all I do is go back to the user under, what's the most common activity they're going to have when they enter into the site. That's what has to be on top, and trying to work through priorities from their perspective.
And on top of that, advertising. You got to stick advertising on there somewhere. And the purist, I don't want advertising cluttering up my pretty image, my wonderful story, but you got to pay for it. And so, the advertisers want your stitchels, and we heard that's a key negative to user experience. So how do we do that gracefully, And there are tools out there, depending on what platforms you're on, for kind of sliding it in or making it more unobtrusive. But yeah, so you got to weigh the pure user experience with the got to make it profitable, got to pay for it.
And thank you for the above the fold comment. I agree, it drives me crazy when I hear it.
Talk about some
Right.
political debate.
There's reality to that for certain, but I like to just drive home that one corner as hard as I can.
One of the things I've seen is like often, if there's silos between design, as Colin was talking about, the technologist, they later on come out, oh, this is not possible, or we need to spend too much time to do it. And I've seen like if the initial process, if you bring the teams together, so even though you're not actually doing development, but they're involved in the process of that whole stakeholder interviews and looking at every story, and as designers are taking the lead, it breaks on some of the barriers. They get used to it. They hear that why it is important from a user experience, and you tend to have less problem because then they have time to figure out what technologies to be used. So then less surprises when you actually go into development.
Actually, I have one funny story about the whole trying to change people's mindsets. Our lead designer, this was his baby, this was his print, this was his thing. And he was like, no, it's got to be this way. And you could not raise any criticism on it at all, which is understandable. He built it. It's his piece of art. We took him to the focus group. He got to sit in that room where he got to look through the one-way glass, and they were like ripping up his magazine, and they were like, oh, why did you do this? And da-da-da, and I can't follow this. And he came back, he goes, well, I had to pick my ego up off the ground and put it back together and take a deep breath. But I heard them. And, that kind of raw, unfiltered feedback is sometimes the necessary slap that they need to get them to start thinking from that perspective.
All right. Anyone else? I think there were a couple more hands. Yeah, please.
Come up to the mic so then shout.
Sure.
So I've got two pieces of advice and then a question to the panel. So the pieces of advice is we did something similar. We had what we thought was a problem in that we were getting lots of complaints about people logging into our site from users. And to show what sort of complexity we deal with, our publication has institutional subscriptions, but it also has 100,000 subscribers. So we have some complexity there. So I asked our vendor, how many complaints have you been getting from customers over logging into the site? And they said 10. And I said, what's the time period for that? And they said 6 months. I said, I really didn't believe this. So I did some user testing, videoed it, and then brought it up to the vendors and showed them the videos, all their support stuff. And I said, now, I get user complaints once a day. And who were these 10 people who contacted you, these 10 customers? And they said MIT, Princeton, Harvard. They didn't see the individual as the customer, they saw the institution as the customer. And that was where there was a discrepancy. Once they understood the problem, it worked out really well. So because we had these issues, I then started making a list of everybody who ever complained about a website. And after we looked and investigated their issue, like they might say a link is broken, or they couldn't find something on the website, or anything like that, we'd always send a response back. And then included in that response was, can we add you to our super selected beta testing group to look at various parts of the site at a later date? And for starters, if they were angry, they immediately felt really pleased and chuffed that they were in some exclusive group, like some premium membership, where they were going to see parts of the site that other people wouldn't see first. And secondly, it turned out to be really, really useful, because I could then talk to them on Skype, show them on Skype a view. It's not the same as having them in the room, but you'll get some data from it. And we have about 120 people now who's in this group, and we check them on regular interviews whether they still want to be in it, but it's very, very handy. Anyway, that's the advice. Now the questions. So 20 years ago, if I wanted to look at a paper in a journal or in a paper in a magazine, I would probably go directly to their website. But we all know nowadays, particularly for journals, they go to the article page. The article page is the landing page. And that adds a whole new layer of UX UI issues if the article page itself is the landing page. So I'm wondering how, in particular, you deal with the need of making sure that the user is seeing the content that they expect to see on that page, yet also get the additional incentive to start browsing around the rest of the site. How do you deal with those sort of issues? Because that's where you get into a lot of politics with other stakeholders on the topic. And then the second thing is, in the little video we saw a minute ago, someone scrolling down the page, and one of the arguments is too strong a word, debates that we have internally is how much of the user behavior that we see people use on mobile phones and tablets can be applied to a desktop view, in particular with the hamburger icon, and scrolling down when you see the top part of the display change to just the title with some other information. Do you have any issues or any suggestions on how to deal with those particular problems?
I can speak to that second one, just because I was reading an article on it recently. I would be careful applying mobile interaction to desktop at the moment, at least. The adoption rate's really high, but we still might need some time. So for instance, hamburger menus, large websites are removing them. So they put them on desktop. You might have seen those on some sites recently. I can't remember the full list, but I know YouTube is one person that took it off. I can't remember who else has done it. So just be careful. I think any major changes you make like that need some A/B testing that's going to happen. The data is going to tell you if there's problems with that.
You can also test for specific device types like tablets and phones on usertesting.com, the testing platform we use. So I would say mock up your mobile designs separately and test them separately from desktop, even if they share functionality and content. For your first question, I feel like it's largely an information architecture issue. I mean, I think you mentioned something about the political side. I think if you could say this is an information architecture issue, this is not, kind of a sort of a voting process, right? And put it in the hands of the UX team to sort of design that navigation and that information architecture. I mean, of course, there's always going to be internal debates about, what the best design is, but again, more testing you can do, more evidence you can show, I think that's the best way to settle those debates.
For your first question also, were you talking about as well, like stickiness to your site after they land on an article page, so to speak? Yeah, because that's such a, well, I guess everybody has that problem nowadays as they use external search engines to find content. And I deal with that a lot in terms of understanding. When they're there, what did they do next? So even sitting down with lots of users, what was your very next step after you find an article? Are you researching? Are you saving it? What are you doing? And then trying to build in whatever you can with the content that you have to enable them to stay on your site, if it's related articles, if it's, certain related content, other activities that sort of advance them the next step that they were doing on their own. If there's understanding what they're doing with the information that they're finding and how it impacts their next steps. I always look, what do they do before they find your content and what do they do after they find your content? And how can you support a wider set of services is often a way to keep them at least close by for a little while.
When I was talking in the break, we talked a little about native searches versus Google and how they're accessing and where they come to your site. That's one of those cases for us where we're using Chartbeat to identify which articles are getting the most stickiness, which are getting the most traffic, and go to that page and put things on that page that would drive them to other places on our site. So, if we had an article recently on marijuana, and naturally that had a lot of hits, and we were like, okay, so what other stories did we write that were related to that we could drive them to in a related stories, or hey, did you read, or embedding it somewhere on that page on the fly to bring them onto our site. And that has been really, really successful for us.
So I think I have a question maybe for the group, also to the expert panel. One of the things that we know anecdotally and through focus groups is what a researcher per se does with the research that they find. They say they download the PDF. So now, in theory, you're taken off of the website, and now you're into a different mode that we have to figure out for the time that PDF is still a viable product and a viable tool for them. What can we build into the PDF product that is useful to them? Its functionality, its features, it's linking them, it's bringing them back to the website. I think that's a challenge for research publishers whose audience still wants to have something that they can file away. So I guess I would ask for any experience in the room.
I mean, one thing I think you could do, you can create interactive PDFs where you can embed links in them. So you could have, if an article has an image or something, you could have a link that, brings the user back to the site to where that image lives, and maybe with an entire library of, a gallery of images or something like that. Just ways to sort of suggest that there's even more content online within the PDF would be one way I can think of.
I think it's interesting too, that challenge is to maybe find what's most useful without turning your PDF into an NASCAR
Yeah.
type book.
Yeah.
One thing you have to maintain, though, is that the links you put in there are for life. So you got to make sure that you have you don't, hey, we just discontinued that whole website, and so all the links and all of those materials are broken, redirecting and thinking the long term for that.
So taking your question about the PDF, I work at Silverchair alongside Brian and Colin. The PDF certainly, like in most of our work right now, at least, is kind of the currency of what we do. But interestingly, we ran a test recently around kind of dovetailing into the stickiness comment, getting users to interact more on your sites. PDF isn't going anywhere probably anytime soon. So we were looking for ways to, even if users were going to download the PDF and split, how do we keep them around long enough to get into another article, another ad impression, therefore doubling ad revenue, so on and so forth. So we ran some user testing on some new article interfaces, article reading interfaces, and we were looking for sort of seducible moments to entice users into other avenues. And we noticed that that some of the article reading behavior was almost unanimous across the board in terms of how the users were doing it. So they would land on the article page, they would immediately jump to the conclusion, read the conclusion. If that was interesting, it might bounce back up to the methods. The methods would probably sell them on whether or not they wanted to grab the PDF and bounce, right? So what we identified there was, okay, every single user we're testing right now is immediately going to the conclusion of the abstract. So as opposed to putting your related content widget in a right And so what we were able to identify there, and by the way, Victoria, once they saw it, they were like, oh my God, we can actually drive people to another article, let's do this, and they agreed with it. And so, I would say it could potentially not even be just about like making your PDF experience better, because everybody has Google Drive, everybody has Dropbox, people are always going to drop PDFs in there, everybody counts, whatever. But really, how do you drive engagement on the site, discovery engagement on the site, right? Because eventually, where everybody ends up is going to be with PDF download if they're really that interested in the article. They're going to want to take a copy with them. But how do we get them in more articles, right? And so that example of kind of identifying that one seducible moment of, we know almost 100% of users are going to go to this one spot first, and that's your moment to entice them into something new. And it worked. Well, at least it worked more than 50% of the time. So just maybe another kind of side of that argument.
Another thing could be, as the technology is developing, the downloading is mostly because of the behavior of offline reading. So I want to read it when, may not be connected to internet or whatever the case may be. And right now there is limitation on browsers in terms of how much that caching could be. But, as the technology is developing, I think that may help as well, because instead of actually physically downloading, you're actually doing an offline caching, which means you're still in the browser experience. You may have other accessibility things available, but you're right, and then PDF is not going anywhere. We still use PDF a lot in the day-to-day life. So I think if I understand correctly, your whole point was that the user experience goes away because you're now dependent on the PDF reader, where we don't have that user experience as it's Adobe product which is leading it. Yeah, please.
So most of us probably have a range of users in terms of their tech savviness. So when I was watching one of the demos out there, I thought to myself, well, I'll just do a Control F and find that instantly. And I spent my last weekend just emailing someone back and forth 10 times to do a two-step process where they just wouldn't listen to me. So how do you manage UI design so that you're not designing for the lowest common denominator, and so it's not hijacked by this person where I need to click here or a see more versus just seeing the link. So we have this wide range, and we do have a large group of users in this space of people that need additional help. But at the same time, that could muck up some other things.
Yeah.
So how do you manage that process? Because these are people giving feedback, and these are part of the data.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say it would depend on if, we're talking about 1 or 2 users out of a pool of 10, or are we talking about 8?
Well, I mean, I don't want to put an age on it, but age has a lot to do with it. So if you have a larger,
Sure.
older users, then it could be a little bit more complicated. But I would say that probably most websites, from everyone from Google to Yahoo to even scientific publishing websites, have users across the spectrum. And if anyone hears this user's having trouble, they assume that this is a persona type or
Yeah.
just a group out there that you gotta take care of. But if you do that, then there's the people that are very tech savvy. That's like, what is all this? It looks like a 1980s website to them when they see that when it's really designed for people that.
Yeah.
Is good.
I mean, I think it's important that, any new design is contemporary and professional, and takes advantage of, the browser's technology. That said, I mean, a project I'm currently working on, we're talking about adding a lot of this kind of information to a help page, hoping that users like that will use the help page, and it's kind of like issues like Colin mentioned before about browser support, putting that information there rather than overloading, say, the article page with some kind of like tutorial type, widget or something. But yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, there isn't a silver bullet solution to every problem. But yeah, I think testing is always just a great way to sort of settle those. I mean, if you're also talking about the internal debates that get created by those kind of things, that's always just our go-to. You guys have anything?
No, but I know your exact scenario. I'm another person who uses Control F 100 times a day, and so I'm always fascinated with people who don't. And I just happened to do a project recently where that was actually being tested. That was an issue, whether or not the audience, and it didn't actually, age played no role in this, in the usage of Control F versus building. In this case, it was another search a very visible search box on the page to search on the page, something that Control F would naturally do. I think I was surprised, maybe, I forgot how many interviews we did, maybe in the range of 20 or something like that, a few different segments. Maybe this comes in time in this particular one, how few people use Control F, and it almost ended up, validating the need for an additional search box at this point in time in 2016. Will it be there in 2018? I don't know, 2017, 18, but there were so few people that naturally did a Control F. It was surprising, but it was consistent. And so in that case, they ended up having a little search box for the page. It wasn't very intrusive, but it was there.
I think one of the problems is that you're expecting people to press Control F. Sure, we intuitively know that, but somebody who's approaching a website isn't thinking, what browser am I in and what control buttons am I going to press? I've been designing the system for about 16 years, and it's the same system for 16 years. And one of the biggest problems we have is introducing any new element on a page or moving a button or moving a box to a spot on the page. And we immediately start hearing feedback about that. And for 16 years we've had, why don't you put a search box on this page? And it's, you can use Control F, but 16 years of feedback on the same exact issue. People just don't care what browser they're in. It doesn't matter to them.
Yeah, one thing, for us, we have a late adopter market. A lot of people are not savvy on any of it, and some are like, I haven't even gotten my first smartphone yet type thing. So with our designs, we made it so that, and this is more true with mobile, everyone's talking website, but now a website needs to be mobile friendly. So you might have, for example, a swipe feature that the older generation might swipe. What do you mean? I want an arrow. So we do an arrow and it swipes. So I think trying to accommodate both as uncluttered a manner as you can is a safer approach. And also being really, really aware of, okay, how much of my market is this? How important is that to that segment? And looking at it as, diminishing returns. So if you've got, your market is only 10% have this problem, accommodate it, but don't spend 80% of your budget trying to accommodate it. Kind of balancing that way. I think there was a question back there.
Anybody else have a question?
So how do you decide when to not listen to the users or to transcend user feedback? So first of all, let me just say I'm a big fan of, I think it's a massive improvement that we work in an environment where we have evidence and can make evidence-based interface decisions, and I think that's massively preferable to the subjective choices of an individual editor or designer. That being said, if we never if all we do is take feedback and work around that leads to a narrowing point of kind of sameness. So where does innovation come from? Where does a breakthrough come from? How do you know? And obviously you have to abide by rules. We're not going to start putting TOCs on the right or whatever, Yeah. But how do you reach breakthroughs in the context where you're trying to take user feedback in, you're trying to deal with what users want? The PDF discussion is a great example. If users had their way and what we listen to in the sort of facile conversations we have, we just give them a bunch of PDFs. Forget all the rest of this HTML crap, forget these features, whatever. Now we all know that behind the scenes we're building a larger infrastructure, broader research tools and capabilities, and that PDFs will be useless in that environment, blah, blah, blah. But that's not what the user today who's just thinking about us as a journal publisher. They just give me the damn PDF and let me get out of here. And so if we listen to that, we're going to have very diminished value in the whole chain of scholarship and dissemination of knowledge. So anyway, how do you decide? And this, I guess, is more of a philosophical than a process question, but I would be interested to hear what each of you has to say about that.
Well, for us, I think it's a little bit like we were talking about, winning over our stakeholders. with prototyping and all of that, you slowly win over, in A/B testing, win over your audience and teach them a better way without slamming it on them. So, our audience was old school, and when we first prototyped the mobile app, everybody said, we want PDF on our mobile app. I'm like, okay. We put it on there. It turned out it was like 78 meg an issue, and it crushed. But not only that, they were like scrolling over the page to see the whole page on a PDF on their phone or whatever it was. And they're like, man, this PDF on the phone and on the tablet, it's just not cutting it. And we're like, oh, well, let's look at this option. And so the users demanded, cried, and screamed for PDF. We gave them a prototype of that. We extensively, tested it in our conferences. And at the end of it all, they're like, yeah, maybe that's not such a good idea. We like this whole HTML thing. This is kind of cool. And that's how we kind of brought them forward. They were adamant about the whole PDF thing, and it didn't translate. But you kind of have to prove it to them like you would prove it to your management team. That's just not the best idea. That's how we did it, anyway.
Yeah, it is a good philosophical question. And it also depends where you are in your testing and what you're testing in the moment. If you're, testing specific wireframes, you're pretty, you're down a path of features and functionality. What you're asking is, even early in the process, understanding their workflow and not always 100% trying to match their workflow, but improve upon the work that they do for the purpose of what they're doing. Because their job isn't to save PDFs, but their job is to, perform some level of research or to treat a patient or whatever their true activity is. So it's kind of that broader process of where do you fit into their whole life of their work life and what they're using the content for. And if they're asking for something very, very narrow, like just give me a PDF, I guess there's a way to think about at some point, where do you draw the line of that's really not what they need. What they needed was a better way to perform these sets of activities or deliver this kind of care to a patient, and how do we get them to that step? What are different pathways to get there? And so there's a mix of what do you listen to them do specifically, and then when you think broader, I don't know if I have a specific answer, but I know I'm always looking to that. Sometimes we have breakthroughs and then we can build that out in features and functionality, and sometimes it is a little more simple of just page layout and design and color and branding. But I don't know if I have a strong, this is what you do. I just know this, the dilemma that you face and, how we try to approach it.
I suppose it's also like recognizing the moments when you're deciding this is a breakthrough, like in the case that Brian mentioned about the seducible moment on the abstract. 50% of people weren't interacting. I don't know whether they disliked it or not, but they weren't using it. But, we thought that this was a strong enough advancement to go forward with it. And I do think that, was a small breakthrough in a way. But so in some cases, yeah, like with testing, you're always going to have users that, in the case that the example that Colin showed, I bet we have a test where someone wasn't interacting with that sticky nav very well. But, at some point you say, most users are liking this, and we know it's a valuable feature that we want to add to our product.
Yeah, I guess I'll tackle kind of onto what's been said. I think we just need to be looking for deeper truths. So sometimes, obviously, users will ask for something very directly, and they might really mean it and need it, and it's a good choice. And sometimes they're asking for the best solution that they have, but we need to figure out what the correct one is. So obviously, they don't need to download 78 meg PDFs, but maybe they were really trying to ask for this should be linking to their Dropbox account or something for later. So, yeah, like automation of some sort. Yeah, obviously that was offline reading. So I don't know when the best way is to figure out when you need to dig deeper or just take the face value that they ask for. I think testing is going to at least solve that on the surface, and if it's not the correct solution, then you're just going to have to do digging with your team to figure it out.
Another thing I think is the analytics. They also play a very important role. So in this agile world, you need to iterate your designs, not only just from a prototype perspective, but actual launch. And then you can get a very good idea about what is exactly being used. You can really capture every single user, story as they're actually going in through the application, whether it's web or mobile. I had a question follow up on that. I mean, as we go through this world, I mean, it really used to be only Android, where you had these various screen sizes and resolutions, and now even iOS, Apple has the same challenge. So from a design perspective, because every web right now is responsive, so whether it's web or mobile, you have to keep in mind that all these screen sizes and resolutions. So how do you go about, maybe it's more Brian and Colin question, like how do you go about, challenge of this, like and newer devices being added every day?
Well, I mean, so yeah, we design sites to be responsive. Ideally, that would mean, they're coded so that if you, you went to them on an Apple, Apple Watch had a browser you could surf the web on, it would scale down so it was usable. It wouldn't be optimized, right? I mean, we don't necessarily keep track of all of the devices that are constantly coming out. We more think about viewport size, and we work in 768 for tablet and 320 for mobile. So the hope. I mean, obviously, if some breakthrough device came out, we would need to, the new iPhone is twice the size or something. Right. We would need to design specific to that. But we more think about, those three common viewports.
Yeah, I'd say the content's really going to drive this one for us, depending on who we're working with. So we'll typically start at our max or min. Mobile's fun to start with because it helps you streamline really what the most important parts of pages are, or you can start at the top with desktop. But we usually just drop the size or enlarge it until things break, and then those are our points that we'll design for. Simpler pages, we won't waste time on extra designs, and then more complex ones with interaction, we will. And using Envision, as you had mentioned, I think is really important because you can link designs together so you get this sort of journey that the user is going to take, and you can see where your holes are in the design process or extra screens that you need to draw that you didn't realize before.
Yes, please.
I was wondering if any of you are working in the academic space, like materials for coursework, that particular type of...
CME related or other?
Well, for example, I work for an organization that publishes nutrition-related materials, and they are used in the classroom a lot, but people are still very attached to PDFs. And I think that there has to be, in the modern world, better ways to get our material really in the classroom. And I would know where to begin, so I'm wondering if any of you are working in that space.
Not exactly, but what Colin referenced is continuing medical education that we design interfaces for some of our clients. So it's a similar concept, I guess. Yeah, I mean, essentially, I think it's a content and information architecture question, finding ways for users to be able to navigate through huge amounts of course material, I imagine. But yeah, I mean, not specifically, we haven't done that on a project, but I feel like we've done very similar.
CME is pretty close. If you already have a platform where you have digital products and you can tie in that material to, quizzing, testing, course loads, that's a great feature for people, obviously, especially for institutions. So, I mean, it exists, yes. We work with it basically through CME, but it can be incredibly helpful and a great, sale as a benefit to your platform.
And from my perspective, I don't know how much this plays a role. I imagine it does with the LMS vendors and delivery of content onto their platforms. Are you working through that, or are you delivering it through your own interface?
Our content is provided through commercial publishing partners.
Okay. So sometimes there are limitations when it goes through a third party in terms of an LMS vendor, and then the effort is more on the content itself and structure and how it goes into the systems and from their perspective. But I guess I'm not knowing enough about your situation, where the
One of our products is a reference /textbook that is now in its 10th edition, so it has a lot of
Okay.
And I was thinking that, that was probably going to be very successful, and to our surprise, print was still, far and away the seller. So I think that there has to be utility for the electronic edition, and maybe if this was created correctly, marketed correctly, I'm sure very well.
Right, yeah, I hear you. So a lot, it depends on what the expectations are, both from faculty and from students in terms of how they read, how they learn, what other resources are at play in their environment of what their typical learning activities follow. And so that's why, in that case, that I would absolutely spend time with both ends, from faculty and students, and see sort of the wider view of their classes and their materials that they're using. I can't imagine they're not using other digital materials. So either it's, this is coming at them from a completely different place, and it's not integrated, or perhaps it's being delivered in a way that's not like other products that they work with. So it's a matter of understanding their whole ecosystem of learning and what works for them and what doesn't, and then trying to fit in. This could have been just, here's the book, plop, in its own sort of world that was kind of, coming out of left field, and it didn't fit in. And that's where sort of, it's not just user testing of a website, but it's user understanding of their environment and workflow.
There's a small startup we worked, I think, as Colin was explaining, so they were building partnership with a lot of commercial publishers. So we built an application where it was, I think, called for CME, and all in the application they were providing is a search. And that, based on what certification, what subject you're looking for, it will go and search articles from various, all the publishers they were interacting with. But they kept the process very simple and built a very lightweight LMS at the front end, which allowed the user to really interact and look for content very quickly. But that's more, again, from a more CME perspective.
We did a prototypical project for a client a couple of years ago that probably took the better part of a year to really understand. This was geared toward medical students, first-year medical students in particular, and the first probably 9 months of the project were really geared toward understanding the workflow of these students at various institutions. There were a lot of commonalities, but there were a lot of differences, and so really nailing a product workflow for a wide spectrum of use cases, even in a very sort of like, narrow slice of, discipline or even, in this case, medical student year one, proved to be very, very tricky.
Any other questions, anybody? I have one last one for, I think it's maybe board, Bonnie and Pam. I think we talked about user, designer, and everything, and then we talked about how the designer versus the technologist versus everything else, where the whole political nature of it. But end of the day, you still have to kind of launch a product, so it's like you've been working on. So how do you bring that balance, like in terms of still having a plan in place, even though you're making sure you're giving enough time to the user design and testing and all that stuff, and then making sure that we still have a product to launch?
Well, in trying not to user input is critical sort of at all stages, right? So I wouldn't say just do it all up front and take forever and get all the information you get and then just run with it to launch a product. It has to be continuous. It shouldn't really get in the way though. So the project plan should be built so that there's upfront information you gather, whether it's through something like a contextual inquiry process observation or whether it's through focus groups or interviews in that way. But at certain checkpoints through your iterative process, you would go back and have those touch points none of these processes, other than the level 3s, they definitely take a little bit longer, but the 1s and 2s can kind of, be implemented and run pretty quickly, all things considered. So, I mean, they'll show you if you're going off on the wrong. I was actually on a project recently where a client was building something and they had gotten very far along in the process. And the first time they asked for input, they brought us in to do all these interviews, and actually it was not on, fitting into a workflow. And rather than them launching sort of a product that was going to miss the mark, they did pause. And yes, it was months before they reconfigured sort of the next set of process that would take place. I won't go into any detail, but they could have found that out, frankly, months earlier and have shortened, so they would have gone to market a lot quicker instead of nearing the end, having to add 6 months. It certainly could have been a lot faster. So I would say rather than hold you up, it actually speeds up the process if you do it at the right at the right spots along the way.
Yeah, I mean, just to echo that, with our process, we had some delays where things took a big right turn based on feedback, but we were fortunate enough to do it when we were prototyping and early on, and it actually saved us in the long run because we were going to spend significant money trying to integrate certain features that the customer's like, yeah, I don't care, and we're like, oh, okay, well then let's redirect that effort and that money. So when we built the plan, we built in, hey, we're going to have for print three basic focus groups, 3 levels of testing. For mobile, we're going to do the same. For mobile was easier because mobile could happen in parallel and be really adaptive and really quick. The print and the content audit, those were big endeavors on their own. They took 6 to 9 months just to get us that groundwork that we needed in place. But once you've got the groundwork in place, and now you're just pulling information for specific features, specific functions or areas, then you just run them in parallel. So hey, we're doing our initial first round, almost like sprints. So you're doing your sprints, and end of every sprint you might have a session or several sprints in your development cycles.
I would also just say that our designs aren't final when we deliver them to the developers, because we continue to work with the developers on the code that they're writing, and how it represents on the web. So, so that's how we collaborate with the developers to the end of the project. So,
okay. Great. Well, we're right on target here. So I want to thank all the speakers and all of you. I hope we got something out of this session to take it back if you're looking at your respective products and how to improve the user design the same. So thank you very much, everybody.